The blood rituals of the Mochica Shamans, secrets buried beneath gold and skulls the sun scorched the coastal deserts of ancient Peru. And beneath its relentless heat rose temples carved from mud and ambition. Here lived the Mochica, a civilization both dazzling and terrifying. Where shimmering gold masked a kingdom built on blood, their priests didn't simply pray to the gods, they fed them. This was not a society where power whispered. It screamed, through the throats of the dying and the silence of the sacrificed. Human life was currency, and the gods were always hungry. Every ritual was an offering. Every drop of blood spilled on the temple floor was a conversation with. The divine of the Mochica weren't guided by written laws, but by omens, bones, and rituals passed through generations of priesthood. Their rulers were not kings in the usual sense, but shamans wrapped in jaguar skins and crowned in gold. These men control the weather, the harvest, even the fate of the living, not through armies, but through the theater of death. Skulls were everywhere, hung on temple walls, buried under doorways, carved into ceremonial vessels. Each one told a story, not of who lived, but how they died. Warriors captured in battle were paraded, then slain with precision. Their blood was painted across altars in sacred patterns. Some were dismembered while still conscious, their agony said to open spiritual pathways between worlds. Gold flowed through Mochica society like water, adorning masks, spears, and even corpses. But wealth was not for the sake of beauty. It was spiritual armor. Priests believed that gold absorbed divine energy, and those who wore it became conduits between the heavens and the earth. Yet behind every golden artifact lay a hidden cost, the silence of those offered in exchange. Divination wasn't done with stars or scrolls. It came through the mutilated bodies of the dead. After a ritual killing, priests would study the way. Blood pooled, how limbs fell, and where the final breath was drawn. These signs, they believed, were messages from their gods, forecasts of war, drought, or divine favor. In the Mochica world, death was not the end. It was a message, a transaction, a bridge. And the ones who crossed it willingly, or not, carried the fate of the entire civilization on their broken backs as the desert wind howled through the crumbling walls of their temples. One truth remained. In the Mochica Empire, splendor was never separate from suffering, and the deeper one walked into its golden halls, the closer they came to hearing the voices of the dead. But those voices spoke loudest through the ones who claimed to hear them. The blood-drinking shamans, whose visions were born in sacrifice. In the heart of the Mochica temples, where shadows clung to stone and the scent of blood lingered in the air, the shamans waited. They were not priests of mercy. They were vessels for the gods, and they did not whisper prayers. They swallowed them whole, along with the blood of the dying. These men held power that surpassed royalty. They walked with jaguar teeth on their necks, and their eyes were said to have seen both past and future. But that vision did not come through peace or meditation. It came through death. Sacrifices were not offered to appease the gods. They were tools, carefully chosen bodies meant to carry messages from the spirit world. As the victim's chest was opened and life drained out, the shaman would collect the warm blood in intricately carved cups. It was not symbolic. It was sacred consumption. The blood was believed to carry the soul's final memories, the last breath of truth before the body went cold. Once consumed, the blood unlocked something primal. The shamans would slip into trances, their bodies convulsing, their eyes rolling back as if possessed. These were not brief moments of spiritual insight. Some trances stretched into days. As the shamans muttered in ancient tongues, foamed at the mouth, and revealed what they claimed were visions from the gods, prophecies of harvests, plagues, victories, and death. The community listened. Even the rulers feared them. To disobey a shaman's vision was to invite destruction. But beneath their spiritual authority lived something darker. These men were not just seers. They were executioners. The same hands that anointed a newborn could crush a throat in the name of divine balance. The blood they drank was more than ritual. It was control. It blurred the line between faith and fear, between healing and horror. Villagers believed the gods spoke only when blood was spilled, and so the shamans spilled it, often and without remorse, wrapped in smoke, firelight, and chants that echoed through sacred chambers. The blood-drinking shamans became the spine of the Mochica world. They were bridges to the divine, yes, but they were also reminders that in this society, truth came not from wisdom, but from sacrifice. And while they ruled the spirit world through trance and torment, others were left to carry the physical. Proof of devotion, the severed heads displayed like trophies. Where flesh met faith, to the Mochica, the human head was more than flesh and bone. It was a container of sacred power. Even in death, it spoke. Even in silence, it ruled. Skulls were not buried out of sight, but raised like flags, turned into masks, and displayed as holy symbols. The act of decapitation was not brutality. It was belief. Warriors taken in battle were stripped of honor, not by chains, but by the blade. Their heads were severed publicly, often while the crowd chanted to the gods of the underworld. Blood was not wiped away. It was left to dry in the sun, a mark of transition from man to message. These ceremonies weren't secret rites. They were spectacles, performances of dominance, control. And divine allegiance once separated. The heads were treated with reverence. Some were transformed into trophy skulls, pierced with holes to be worn on belts or hung from temple gates. Others were turned into sacred vessels, painted with symbols, adorned with feathers, and believed to carry visions. It was said that if a warrior had been strong in life, his head would continue to protect the tribe after death. If he had been an enemy, his skull could be used to trap his spirit, forever denying him peace. Graves of high-ranking shamans and priests often reveal dozens of these skulls, ranged in careful patterns, each one a relic, each one a warning. These weren't mere trophies. They were offerings of proof of the priest's favor with the gods, proof of obedience demanded and vengeance executed. Some believed the heads whispered in dreams. Others claimed they guided weather, health, and even war. Children were taught to fear them. Warriors were taught to become them. The severed head was never just an end. In the world of the Mochica, it was a beginning, a voice that echoed beyond the grave, a symbol that marked the line between power and punishment. And while skulls lined the walls in silent stares, a different kind of ritual unfolded in the moonlight, one that asked women to bleed slowly, not for death, but for balance. In the stillness of the desert nights, beneath the pale watch of the moon, the Mochica performed one of their most haunting rites. Young women were selected not by age or beauty, but by dreams, omens, or the alignment of stars. They were believed to be touched by lunar spirits, marked not for death, but for devotion. The tribe called them chosen by the moon and Lipa, victims slain on altars. These women were not offered quickly. Their sacrifice unfolded slowly, over months of ceremonies tied to the lunar calendar. Their blood was not taken in one violent act, but through repeated rituals where cuts were made to release it in small, controlled amounts. The flow was seen as sacred, a slow river between life and the gods. The blood was gathered in bowls shaped like crescent moons, then used to anoint ceremonial idols, masks, and weapons. It was believed that this offering balanced two forces, fertility and death. Without it, crops would fail. Children would sicken, and the spirits might abandon the living. Though their suffering was quiet, it was not unseen. These women were cloaked in white, fed specially prepared meals, and kept away from men. But behind the rituals lay an unspoken truth. Their bodies were temples, but also prisons. Each ceremony brought more pain, more blood, more irreverence, and more exhaustion to the outside world. Being chosen was an honor. Families wept with pride when their daughters were taken. The community bowed in respect. But those who endured the months-long ordeal rarely returned whole, and many did not return at all. The moon never wept. The spirits never spoke. Only the silence of the women remained. Stitched into the fabric of Mochica belief, a quiet echo of beauty twisted into suffering, and while they bled in service to balance, others drank from the chaos. Men who ruled through hallucination and fear, guided by visions born not of spirit alone, but of poison. Power in the Mochica world was never simple. Their rulers were not just kings. They were priests, prophets, and performers, draped in gold and feathers. They stood above the crowds like living gods. But their true strength did not come from weapons. It came from belief. Belief carefully shaped by visions no one could question. At the heart of this control was a sacred brew, made from psychoactive plants native to the region. It was thick, bitter, and dangerously potent. During major festivals, entire communities were made to drink it, from warriors to farmers. No one was spared. What followed was not celebration, but surrender of the senses, of time, of control. Under the influence, people saw gods descend from the sky, ancestors rise from the earth, and spirits dance in firelight. And in the center of it all stood the priest kings, speaking in tongues. Surrounded by blood, rituals, and choreographed displays, every word they uttered, every scream, every whisper, was taken as divine truth. There were no doubts, no resistance, only faith and fear. The rituals were theatrical and terrifying. Blood sacrifices, performed mid-vision, became more than spectacle. They became prophecy. The hallucinating crowds didn't see death. They saw divine justice. The priest-king's voice, amplified by drugs and devotion, echoed like thunder. Even the hallucinations were curated. Drums beat in patterns to guide visions. Fires flickered in time, bursts, colors. Sounds and sacrifices were arranged with precision. It was not madness. It was method. And so the Mochica ruled, not with violence alone, but through the manipulation of the mind. Their priest-kings did not demand loyalty. They manufactured it. But when the gods were not satisfied with words or visions, something darker was required. No blade, no fire, just silence and order. Drowning, slow and sacred, became the next passage between the living and the divine. Beneath the golden altars and blood-stained stones, the Mochica believed in a quieter gateway to the gods. Water, deep within their temples, sacred wells, were carved into the earth, hidden from sunlight, echoing with silence. These were not wells for drinking. They were for crossing. Not all sacrifices met death by blade. Some were led to these dark pools in solemn procession, their fates already sealed. Drowning was not considered cruel. It was seen as purification, a slow surrender of breath. A return to the unseen world below. The water was believed to be a mirror between realms, a sacred passage through which souls could travel to the underworld and carry messages from the living. The chosen did not cry out. They were drugged or bound. Eyes wide or closed in prayer, priests watched from the stone, edges above, their chants blending with the faint sound of moving order. As the bodies disappeared beneath the surface, no splash broke the ritual, only silence remained. His silence said to please the gods more than screams ever could. Even children were not spared. When omens pointed to famine, plague, or spiritual imbalance, the youngest and purest were taken. Their innocence was thought to cleanse, to heal, to restore balance in ways adult offerings could not. These sacrifices were not performed in front of crowds. They were hidden, secret, sacred, and yet their impact rippled outward, in harvests, in rainfall, in the trembling belief that death, when delivered correctly, could keep a world from crumbling. But while some were drowned in stillness, others were buried in layers, their bones wrapped in gold, their mouths still parted in silent screams. Because in the Mochica world, the dead did not sleep, they warned. Beneath layers of sand and time, the bones remain, some curled in anguish, others outstretched, as if still reaching for air that never returned. In the dry earth of northern Peru, archaeologists have unearthed graves that do not speak. They scream, skulls shattered from blunt force, ribs pierced by obsidian, necks twisted at unnatural angles. These are not the quiet deaths of age. They're the remnants of ritual, deliberate, precise, and sacred. Buried beside them lie ceremonial knives still stained with traces of iron, masks of beaten gold pressed against the faces of the sacrificed, and fragments of cloth soaked in time-darkened blood. Many were not laid to rest. They were left in the same position they died. Arched backs, clenched hands, mouths agape. No shroud, no peace, just the frozen echo of pain. It was believed the moment of death captured a message. And that message had to be preserved some. Tombs contained dozens of bodies ranged in spirals, circles, or tight clusters, each formation tied to a spiritual meaning. Warriors beside warriors, virgins near idols, children beneath altars. The placement mattered. It was ritual even in the grave. These remains do more than tell of a culture. They accuse. They reveal a world that draped horror in beauty, and called it divine. The Mochica did not write books. They etched belief into bodies. They carved power into bone. Their gold glitters in museums. But their true legacy lies deeper, in the silence of the sacrificed, and the shadows of a civilization that believed pain was the price of balance. And even now, under dust and ruin, the bones still whisper the blood songs of the ancients. Maori rituals they don't want remembered among the lush valleys and wind-lashed coasts of ancient Aegean. The Maori did not simply live, they endured, they fought. And they bled in ways that bound the physical world to the spirit realm. For them, the body was more than flesh and bone. It was a vessel of ancestral power. Blood carried memory, bone held mana. The sacred energy that connected generations. To touch another person's head without permission was not just rude, it was dangerous. The head was the seat of the soul. Even stepping over someone's sleeping body could be seen as a violation of taboo, a sacred code that governed every breath, every gesture, every space. These weren't abstract beliefs, they shaped how people moved, ate, fought, and died. Breaking taboo risked angering the gods, dishonoring the ancestors, and inviting sickness or death. Life under taboo was a test of discipline. A mistake wasn't just personal shame, it could doom a whole village. Women giving birth were kept apart, their state considered both powerful and perilous. The afterbirth, the umbilical cord, even the blood, it was all sacred. Mishandling it could curse a child before their first cry. And for warriors, the body was a battlefield long before war began. Young boys were trained not only in weapons, but in pain. They learned to carry wounds without sound. To flinch was to invite disgrace in the chaos of combat. A warrior's death wasn't feared, it was sought with pride. For to die in battle meant the soul might rise with mana intact, honored by the tribe, remembered in chants. The bones of the dead were never left to rot after the body decayed. Families returned to collect the sacred remains. Skulls were polished and hidden in caves. Some were even whispered to at night, believed to carry advice from the beyond. This wasn't macabre, it was loyalty that crossed the boundary of death. But the most terrifying truth was how deeply they believed the invisible world ruled the visible one. A simple act, done in ignorance, stepping into the wrong stream, speaking a chief's name aloud could call down punishment, sickness, madness, stillbirth, even entire harvests failing. Rituals had to be performed to make things right. Offerings were made in secret, chants spoken in trembling voices. There was no such thing as coincidence. Every misfortune had a spiritual cause. Every cure had to please the unseen. In this world, fear was not weakness. It was respect, and power did not come from wealth, it came from obedience to ancestors who never stopped watching. In such a world, even beauty could be dangerous. And few things were more beautiful or more feared than the ritual that marked a man's face forever, a tattoo not drawn, but carved. In ancient Maori life, the face was not just skin. It was a sacred canvas, carved with history, lineage, and power. The moche, a series of intricate spirals, lines, and sacred markings, was not inked, but chiseled into flesh using tools made of sharpened albatross bone and volcanic stone. The pain was not a side effect. It was the point. Every line etched onto the skin spoke to a man's ancestors, his status, his courage. The patterns were read like maps of bloodline and reputation. But beneath their beauty lay a terrible weight. The belief that the tattoo was a spiritual contract. If it was done incorrectly, the consequences were not just social, they were cosmic. A poorly carved moche could be seen as an insult to the gods, a stain on the family's honor. Some believed it could twist a warrior's fate, cursing his children, or inviting madness. Others feared it would prevent the soul from being recognized in the afterlife. To wear an incomplete moche was to walk the world as a spiritual ghost seen by the living, but ignored by the ancestors. The ritual itself demanded silence. The man receiving the moche could not cry out. No matter how deep the cuts ran or how long they bled, every wince was a whisper of weakness. Every scream risked shame not only for the man, but for his entire tribe. Boys were raised to watch these ceremonies in stillness, learning that true strength was quiet and that dignity could mean dying without sound. Infections were common. Tools weren't sterilized, and open wounds became swollen and hot. Some bled for days, feverish and delirious. If a man died from infection, it was considered a tragedy, but if he survived with a botched moche, the shame could follow him for life. Some chose to end their lives rather than live with the spiritual failure carved into their flesh. The act of tattooing wasn't just art. It was sacred warfare between body and spirit. Each line called upon the gods. Each drop of blood carried meaning, and once it began, it could not be undone. To wear the moche was to carry one's soul on the face for all to see. And in that ancient world where identity, fate, and faith were written in skin, the most beautiful faces were often born in agony. But deeper still than skin was the hunger for a victory. And in some battles, the body of a fallen enemy was worth more than a trophy. It was a spiritual feast. To the ancient Maori, flesh was not just meat, it was memory. And in the aftermath of battle, the fallen enemy's body was not left to rot or buried in haste. It was sacred. It was fuel. It was justice. Cannibalism among early Maori was not practiced out of hunger or cruelty. It was a deeply spiritual act, woven into the beliefs that governed war, honor, the afterlife. A slain warrior carried more than blood. His body was the vessel of Mona, spiritual force that measured power, courage, and divine favor. By consuming his flesh, the victors believed they absorbed that Mona, taking his strength into themselves, robbing his soul of a return in doing so. They sealed their triumph in both the physical and spiritual realms. But this was not a mindless Feast, the ritual was exact. Certain parts of the body were chosen with meaning, often the heart, the tongue, or the hands. These were believed to hold the core of a man's essence, his courage, his voice, his actions. The body would be cooked in earth ovens, the same method used to prepare sacred feasts. Songs were sung, prayers whispered. The eating was not gluttony, it was ceremony. There was no shame in this act. In fact, it was a form of vengeance so complete that it left no room for a spiritual return. If an enemy's body was consumed, his ghost could not rise, his name would fade, his lineage would break. Entire tribes feared the dishonor of having their dead eaten, just as they glorified the power of doing so to others. In some cases, the heads of enemy chiefs were preserved and displayed eyes closed, mouths carved into eternal screams. These Mekomikai were not just trophies. They were reminders of a soul defeated so thoroughly that even death had no dignity left among some elders. The act of eating an enemy was remembered as the moment one truly conquered, not just on the battlefield, but in the realm of spirits. It wasn't about hunger. It was about erasure. It was about consuming the past so that the future belonged only to the victor. And yet, for all its terror, this ritual was bound by strict spiritual law. To misuse a body to eat one without proper cause or ceremony was to risk punishment from the gods. Illness, madness, and misfortune could follow those who disrespected the sacred process. Even in violence, there were rules for the ancient Maori. Justice was not always delivered by blade or fire. Sometimes it came with teeth and prayer, and sometimes it ended with silence when no one dared speak the name of the man they had devoured. But not all. Punishment left behind bones. Some fates were worse ones where the body remained whole, but the soul was slowly unmade by silence and exile. In ancient Maori belief, the world was not divided by walls or weapons, it was divided by tapu. This sacred law governed everything, what could be touched, who could be seen, where one could walk, and even what could be spoken. Tapu wasn't just rule, it was spiritual architecture. And to break it was to break the order of the universe. The consequences were swift, but not always visible. A person who violated tapu could be cursed by the Tohunga spiritual leader whose words carried the weight of gods. That curse was not a spectacle. It began with silence, one by one. Friends looked away. Family withdrew. The entire tribe, as if guided by invisible threads, acted as one. They stopped seeing the person. This was not punishment through pain, it was punishment through absence. No one could speak to the shamed. No one could feed them, touch them, or share shelter. They were called Wakanoa, made spiritually void. In a culture where connection to tribe and ancestral was everything, to be cut off was worse than death. Some died within days, not from hunger, but from despair. Others wandered the edges of villages, calling out to children who no longer recognized their names. Their cries were met with stone stillness. No ritual could be performed until death had come. Even then, burial was denied. Their bodies were left outside the sacred grounds, denied passage into the next life. The fear of this fate was deep and generational. Children were taught tapu not with threats, but with wide-eyed stories of those who disappeared in plain sight alive, but unacknowledged, buried while still breathing. The terror lay not in torture, but in becoming invisible. To break tapu was to break trust with both the living and the dead. Redemption was almost never possible, and so every gesture, every word was watched. Every meal was a ritual. Every path walked in caution. For the Maori, survival meant more than food or strength. It meant harmony with the forces no eye could see, and when those forces turned, the punishment did not leave marks. It erased a person until nothing remained. But sometimes erasure was not enough. In older days, when the ancestors whispered of protection, the tribe listened often with sacrifice, and some of those sacrifices were buried beneath their very feet, beneath the woven mats of some early Maori dwellings. Hidden from sight, but never from memory, lay the bones of children. These were not the remains of accident or illness, they were placed with intention, buried beneath carved thresholds and sacred walls to guard the living from forces unseen to modern ears. It may echo with horror, but in ancient Maori belief, it was sacrifice born of devotion, not cruelty. The spirit of a child was believed to hold great potence pure and formed, and closer to the world of gods than that of men. To offer such a spirit was not seen as murder. It was seen as a sacred transaction in some tribes. The most powerful protection came from the most cherished life, the firstborn of a chief or a priest. Believed to carry the strongest mana from the bloodline, the child would be laid beneath the earth at the moment a structure was built, usually beneath the putokomana with a central post believed to anchor the spirit of the house. In some tellings, the child was already lifeless, taken by illness and repurposed for a sacred duty. In others, darker stories linger, of infants silenced with chant and shadow, wrapped in flax, and placed alive into the earth, their cries muffled by the soil that made a home whole. These spirits were not viewed as victims. They were guardians, watchers beneath the feet of generations. It was believed their souls never wandered. They stayed to protect, to warn, to hold back the darkness that came from the wild places. If a house remained standing through storms, fire, or war, the strength was credited to the child below. Over time, the practice began to vanish as contact with European settlers grew, and new beliefs took root. The rituals of old were buried in secrecy, yet even centuries later, during renovations of ancient meeting houses or sacred sites, bones have been found tucked into corners of foundations, small, delicate, unchanged by time. Whispers return each time, surfacing old fears and reverence. In equal measure, the psychology behind the ritual was complex. It was not done lightly, nor with cruelty. It was done with ceremony, conviction, and generations of belief that the dead, especially the pure, could offer protection no living warrior could match. The ground beneath the tribe was never just earth. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was a living pact between those who had walked and those who had not yet learned to walk. But even the strongest guardians could not stop time, and for some elders, there came a day when no ritual, no post, no buried protector could hold off shame, weakness, or age. When that day came, they didn't wait for death to find them. They walked to meet it in the shadowed valleys of ancient Aotearoa, where every tree was sacred and every mountain watched in silence. Death did not always arrive uninvited. For some Maori elders, life was not measured in years, but in mana, the spiritual strength tied to one's purpose, presence, and pride, and when mana began to fade. So to did the desire to remain among the living, Wakamo Maori ritual suicide was not seen as despair. It was seen as dignity, a final act of spiritual control. Elders who felt they had become burdens to their families, or believed their life had drifted too far from usefulness, would sometimes choose to leave before illness or shame claimed their name. There was no screaming, no spectacle, only a quiet decision made with the same clarity that once guided battle, birth, and belief. The farewell was not rushed. It was a sacred rite in itself. Loved ones gathered, sometimes in the hush of early morning, to sing parting chants and offer final touches to the elder's clothing or body. Tears were allowed, but never pleading. To stop them would be to deny their authority, to question. Their choice was to insult the journey they had already begun in spirit. Then, wrapped in woven flax or a sacred cloak, the elder would walk slowly, deliberately into the forest, into the mountains, or down a forgotten path. It was said they were going to meet the ancestors, walking without fear because they carried no shame. Some believed that the birds would fall silent as they passed, that the land itself recognized the courage of such a step. The place they chose to die became tapu sacred and untouchable. No one returned to disturb the bones. The body was left to nature as a gift to the gods and to the spirits that roamed between worlds. Families mourned not in guilt, but in respect. They told stories of strength, not sorrow. The death was remembered not as a loss, but as a final offering of honor. This ritual did not come from weakness. It came from a belief that life, when no longer sacred, must not be dragged forward. To choose death before dishonor was the last proof of spiritual clarity. And in this ancient world where flesh bore history, and silence could destroy, those who chose when to die were remembered longer than some who chose only how to live. Inside the forest of fear, the Mbuti tribe's rituals the world wasn't meant to see. In the heart of the Congo's Ituri rainforest, the air hangs thick with silence alive, watchful and deeply sacred. For the Mbuti Pygmies, this dense, green world is not just a shelter. It is a god, a living force with a voice, a temper, and the power to curse or protect. Every rustle of leaves, every shift of wind, is believed to be the forest speaking, and sometimes it speaks in warnings. Among the Mbuti, the forest is known as Ti, a name whispered with both love and fear. It is said that Ti watches every child from the moment of birth, is stepped too far from the clan's circle, a lie left unconfessed, a laugh during sacred silence, and the forest response. Parents tell tales of children who vanished into the trees, never seen again. No footprints, no screams, only a sudden stillness, as if the jungle swallowed them whole. These disappearances are not blamed on animals or misfortune. They are believed to be punishments, acts of correction by the forest spirit itself. To the Mbuti, a missing child is not a tragedy, it is a message to protect their young. Families perform rituals that border on the unsettling. Small offerings, locks of hair, drops of blood from a pierced finger. Even the first cry of a newborn are given to the roots of sacred trees. The tribe believes these trees hold memory, capable of recognizing each child's scent and soul. In extreme cases, mothers have been known to fast for days in isolation, kneeling beside marked trees, begging forgiveness for a child's misbehavior. The fear is not abstract, it shapes behavior. Children are raised to walk lightly, speak softly, and never question an elder's word. Defiance is not punished with a slap or a scolding. It is believed to awaken the wrath of the woods. This fear lives in lullabies, in warnings carved into bark, in the way even the boldest child dares not whistle after dark. Among outsiders, the Mbuti are often described as in tune with nature. But behind that harmony lies a constant tension, an unspoken agreement between people and a forest they believe can think, feel, and punish. And when punishment comes, it doesn't end in death. It ends in disappearance without a trace, without closure. Deeper inside this world, justice takes a form unlike anything known outside the rainforest. Where others seek law, the Mbuti seek balance. And to restore that balance, blood must among the Mbuti. Wrongdoing is not simply a mistake, it is a wound in the soul of the tribe, and wounds must be cleansed. In a world where harmony is sacred and the forest spirit watches in silence, disobedience carries a price measured not in shame, but in suffering. Punishment among the Mbuti is public, ritualized, and deeply spiritual. It is not meant to humiliate the offender, but to drive out the invisible rot they believe disobedience brings. The most feared of all punishments is the ikakomio ritual of symbolic bloodletting. A shallow cut is made, often on the chest or arms, and the blood is smeared onto leaves or stones, offered to the forest. It is believed that only through blood can balance be restored. The act is not always violent, but it is always sacred. Even starvation can become a form of spiritual penance. Those who violate the social codes, such as stealing food, lying to an elder, or breaking a marriage pact, may be banished to the forest's edge without supplies. There, they are forced to fast in isolation, praying for a sign that the forest has forgiven them. Until then, they remain untouchable, cursed. If others make contact too soon, the sickness of the offense is thought to spread. Some punishments involve silence. Entire camps may refuse to speak to an accused person for days, even weeks, treating them as if they've already died. This psychological exile is meant to break the ego and invite reflection. But for many, it feels like erasure, like being unmade while still alive. Every punishment has one purpose: purification. The tribe fears not only the act of disobedience, but the unseen consequences it brings. Like an anger of the forest, a single insult can poison the hunt. To protect the many, the one must bleed, starve, or vanish. Outsiders may call it cruel, but for the Mbuti, it is survival, because in their world, the danger is not just the crime, it's what the crime invites. When death comes to the Mbuti, it is met not with mourning songs or carved headstones, but with silence and distance. There are no graves, no ceremonies of return. Instead, the dead are abandoned, left at the edge of the forest like forgotten echoes. Among the Mbuti, a corpse is not a symbol of peace. It is seen as spiritually contaminated, heavy with the residue of a soul that has left. Once the final breath escapes, the body is no longer a person, it is a vessel emptied and dangerous. To bury it would mean keeping it too close. To mourn too long would risk anchoring its spirit among the living. The forest, they believe, must reclaim its own. Bodies are placed near the base of trees far from the camp, sometimes wrapped in bark or banana leaves, sometimes not. There is no digging, no fire, no farewell. Children are kept away. Names of the dead are rarely spoken again, and in some cases, never. Speaking their name is thought to call their spirit back, an act that could poison the camp with illness, madness, or misfortune. Even the family of the deceased avoids contact. Grief is swallowed in silence. A mother may avert her eyes from the place her child was taken. A widow may sleep far from the others, considered unclean until a cleansing rite is performed. No physical tokens are kept. The dead must dissolve completely into the forest, unseen and unremembered. Outsiders often see this as cruelty, but for the Mbuti, it is mercy. Keeping the dead to close risks trapping their spirits, preventing them from joining the sacred. Forest, the faster the release, the cleaner the soul's journey. This belief governs everything from how they sleep to how they hunt. Even a campsite is abandoned after a death left behind forever, as if the ground itself had been cursed. Life cannot begin again where death has passed. In a world where survival depends on balance with the unseen, the Mbuti treat death not as an end, but as a spiritual hazard. And when the forest decides it's time to take someone back, the living must obey or risk inviting spirits into places they don't belong. In the dense silence of the Aturi rainforest, illness is never just physical. Among the Mbuti, it is a sign, proof that something sacred has been disturbed. Fever, confusion, or sudden weakness may mean that a spirit of the forest has stolen a piece of someone's soul. And when the soul is taken, the only path to healing is a hunt not for animals, but for what's been lost in the unseen. These hunts begin with noise. Elders gather in a circle and shout into the trees, calling the name of the sick. Their voices rise in rhythmic bursts, meant to frighten the spirits into giving back what they've taken. If the illness worsens, they burn animal fat or hair, the smoke rising like a plea into the jungle canopy. The scent, they believe, draws the attention of helpful spirits or drives away the ones that bite. Sometimes the ritual turns inward. The sick are accused of spiritual weakness. Children may be forced to confess hidden lies in front of the group, pressured by elders and family to speak until tears come. This emotional breaking is not cruelty in their eyes, it is necessary. Only through confession can the spirit be lured out and the soul made whole again. But fear is planted young. Children are warned. Lie, disobey, or walk too far alone, and the forest will eat your name. The phrase is whispered like a curse. To have one's name devoured means more than death. It means vanishing into nothing, no body, no trace, no memory. Even speaking about such children is forbidden, as if the forest might notice and take another. This invisible war shapes every day. Illness is not treated with herbs alone, but with ritual fear. A headache may mean a forgotten promise. A cough could signal an unspoken sin. Every wound, every weakness, becomes a test of spiritual balance. In a world where even the wind might be listening, truth is survival. But when spirits are blamed, someone must always be held accountable, and sometimes the hunt doesn't stop. When the soul returns, it continues, searching for who angered the forest in the first place. For the Mbuti, music is not mere expression, it is power. Every melody, every beat, carries weight beyond sound. Songs are used to call animals, to calm the forest, to guide spirits home. But not all songs are safe. Some are feared, some once sung are believed to bring death. The Mbuti hold that certain rhythms, especially those linked to mourning or betrayal, should never be played under a full moon. Singing during sacred silences or using a drum pattern that mimics thunder can awaken what they call the Ndemba, an unseen spirit of misfortune. Elders say it doesn't arrive with noise. It comes in quiet. Whole families have vanished in their sleep after breaking these taboos. No bodies, no signs, just silence, as if the forest erased their presence. The most feared songs are those passed down in fragments only partially remembered. Intentionally incomplete, they are never sung in full. To do so is to finish an invitation, and some invitations, they believe, cannot be taken back. Even joyful songs are treated with care. A song meant for hunting cannot be sung near the dying. A song of birth must never echo through a mourning camp. The wrong song in the wrong place doesn't just confuse the spirits, it offends them. And when spirits are offended, the punishment is rarely loud. It is disappearance, illness, or madness. Children are taught to sing carefully, to never improvise, and to always ask before performing an old tune. Music is taught with more caution than fire. Outsiders may hear the Mbuti's forest harmonies and hear beauty, but beneath that beauty lies a map of taboos, warnings, and unspoken rules, because here, one wrong note can be more dangerous than a sharpened spear, and in the forest that listens, even a melody can become a curse. Among the Mbuti, marriage is not chosen by heart or family alone. It is chosen by the forest. A union is seen not just as the joining of two people, but as a spiritual alignment. If that balance is broken, the consequences are felt by all. Elders speak of the sickness winder curse that drifts through the camp when a marriage is rejected or dissolved without spiritual consent. Headaches, spoiled food, and restless dreams are all seen as signs that the forest disapproves. In their belief, the harmony of the tribe mirrors the harmony of its marriages. when a match is wrong. The entire group suffers. It is not uncommon for spiritual leaders to announce a marriage based on dreams. These dreams are said to come from the forest itself, delivered during sacred fasts or moonlit trances. A girl as young as 12 may be promised to a man she has never spoken to because the forest wisp, ere his name, refusing such a match, is not seen as courage, but as rebellion against the very spirit that keeps the tribe alive. Those who resist face isolation. They may be forbidden to sleep near the fire or share in the morning meal. The group will avoid eye contact, their silence, sharper than any weapon. Some are exiled to the forest's edge, left to prove their loyalty by surviving alone. There is no room for a love without balance, no room for refusal without consequence. What may seem cruel from afar is, to the Mbuti, a necessary sacrifice, because, in their eyes, the forest does not just feed and shelter it chooses. It punishes, and it binds souls together. And when the spirit of the woods speaks, even the strongest must bow, for in this world, disobedience does not just risk anger, it risks the wrath of something older than time, the sharp teeth of the Minoan, inside the rituals of pain, beauty, and death in the heart of the Minoan Islands, deep in the Indonesian archipelago. Beauty is not gentle. It is sharp, raw, and painful. Here, in a land surrounded by turquoise, waters, and thick jungle, the people carry a quiet belief that the soul is fragile, restless, and always at risk of drifting away. To live without balance is to invite sickness, sorrow, or worse, spiritual death. The Minoan do not trust smiles shaped by nature. Teeth are filed into points, transformed into the jagged symbols of purity and strength. It begins young. Girls, as early as puberty, sit still on woodland stools, surrounded by family, as elders press shards of stone or sharpened knives against their enamel. There is no numbing, no medicine, only grit, blood, and the deep inhale of tradition. This ritual is not for decoration. In Minoan belief, the body must reflect inner harmony. A soul that sees a face it does not recognize may abandon it, and so the teeth are changed, not for vanity, but for survival. The sharper the teeth, the greater the respect. Men are drawn to women whose mouths echo the spirits. A blunt smile is a shameful mark, a sign of imbalance, of danger, of a soul too wild to be trusted. To refuse the ritual is to risk social exile, or worse, spiritual illness that no medicine can cure. Pain is not hidden. It is endured in silence. Blood drips down the chin, mixing with chants and the burning scent of smoldering leaves. Mothers watch with pride. Grandmothers remember their own day of transformation. This is not cruelty. It is devotion, the act of reshaping the body to keep the spirit from leaving it behind. To outsiders, it may seem barbaric, but to the Minoan, it is sacred, is spiritual insurance passed through generations. In a world where balance decides everything, from health to luck to love, the teeth must obey the soul's demands, and this is only the beginning. The Minoan body is a living canvas, a defense against unseen forces, just beyond the sharpened teeth, beneath layers of coconut oil and jungle dust. Another ritual waits, one where every mark, every line, is drawn not by choice, but by belief, for on this island, the soul does not rest in silence. It must be kept, bound, and inked into skin. In the Minoan world, beauty is a promise made to the soul, and that promise is written in blood. For young women, the path to spiritual wholeness begins with a smile that must be broken before it can be blessed. The ritual is simple, but the pain is not. Using only a blade or a shard of coconut husk, the front teeth are carved down into delicate, Dagger-like points. No numbing herbs. No sedatives, only steady hands and centuries of belief. Each tooth is filed, scraped, and shaped with unflinching precision. Blood pools at the gum line. Lips tremble. But no cries are heard. Suffering is expected. Silence is strength. This is not a choice. It is a sacred duty, without sharp teeth. A woman is said to be incomplete, exposed to wandering spirits and illness in Minoan belief. A dull smile is a weak barrier between the body and the spirit world. But sharpened teeth send a message. The soul is awake, and it is protected. Girls are prepared from childhood. They grow up watching their mother's smiles, jagged, beautiful, and revered. They know what waits for them, and when the day comes, it is not fear they show, but obedience, sometimes pride. This transformation is their gateway to womanhood, to respect, to spiritual survival. The process lasts hours. The results last a lifetime. Long after the bleeding stops and the gum scar, the sharpened teeth remain. A warning to spirits, a badge of devotion, and a cultural signature passed through bloodlines. Outsiders may flinch. But within the tribe, this bleeding smile is seen as elegant, brave, holy. To the Minoan, pain is not punishment. It is proof, and in that proof, the soul finds peace. But the smile is just the first cut. Beyond the mouth, the skin must also speak. Ink lines will soon crawl across the body like spiritual armor. Because for the Minoan, beauty and balance demand more than blood. They demand permanence. In the Minoan world, the skin is more than flesh. It is a canvas for protection, a sacred service where the soul must be sealed. Every mark, every curve of ink is designed with one purpose: to keep the spirit from slipping away. Without tattoos, the soul is restless, vulnerable. A person without ink is considered unfinished, a walking danger to themselves and the tribe. They risk spiritual drift, a silent death where the body remains, but the soul fades into the jungle mist. So the Minoan tattoo, not for beauty, not for status, but for survival. Using sharpened sticks, the sikri, tribal shamans, drive soot and charcoal beneath the skin in deliberate, painful rhythms. The process can last days, even weeks. No part of the body is spared. From the shoulders to the thighs, from the chest to the hands, the lines spread like roots, anchoring the spirit deep within the body. The pain is part of the ritual. The sting of the needle mimics the struggle between body and soul, and when the ink dries, the Minoan believe the spirit has chosen to stay. Each pattern has meaning. Some call for strength in hunting, others shield from sickness or bad luck, but all serve the same core belief, that a tattooed body is a soul-holding body. To outsiders, the designs may look random, primitive, but to the Minoan, they are maps of spiritual defense, stories written in pain and permanence. And even this sacred ink is not the final layer. There are deeper beliefs still, ones that come alive only when death draws near. For when the soul prepares to leave forever, the tribe must act fast, or risk unleashing something far worse than grief. In the Minoan world, death is not the end. It is a risk. A soul torn from the body does not vanish. It hovers, watches, waits. If left unanchored, it may return to the living, not with comfort, but with wrath. The dead are feared as much as they are grieved. The soul, now restless, is believed to wander through the village, confused and dangerous. Misfortune, illness, and even madness are often blamed on spirits who are not properly sent away. To protect the living, the tribe performs intricate death rituals, not as ceremony, but as spiritual defense. The moment a person dies, the body is cleaned, people, dressed in ceremonial garments. But the true ritual lies in the days that follow. Animals are sacrificed, pigs, chickens. Their blood offered to calm the soul and guide its path to the spirit realm. Families mourn loudly. Their cries not just expressions of pain, but signals to the soul that it is time to leave. Fires burn through the night. Sacred chants echo through the trees. Every gesture, every sound serves a purpose, to seal the barrier between the living and the dead. If a single step is skipped, the soul may linger, angry and incomplete, his spirit with the power to infect dreams, sicken children, or curse the harvest. Even after the body is buried, the fear does not fade. For weeks, families remain cautious. Meals are offered to the departed. Names are not spoken. Certain areas are avoided at dusk. The boundary between life and death remains thin. And the cost of disrespect is believed to echo for generations to the Mentawai. The soul is sacred, but never safe. And when the living fail to guide it home, the price is more than grief. It is hunting yet sometimes the greatest danger comes not from the dead, but from the living who break the code. The ones who disrupt balance, and in Mentawai belief, that disruption demands punishment. In the Mentawai belief system, life is a delicate weave. Man, nature, and spirit tied together in constant tension. To disturb that thread, even slightly, is to invite collapse. Harmony is survival, and those who threaten it are not merely punished. They are spiritually mocked. Theft, betrayal, or disobedience are not just offenses against people. They are offenses against the soul. Such acts are seen as cracks in the balance, capable of weakening the entire tribe's spiritual defenses. Punishment begins with isolation. The guilty are often banished to the forest's edge, cut off from community and comfort. Their names are not spoken. Their presence is treated as contamination. Shame becomes the first wound. Public rituals follow. The accused may be forced to undergo a spiritual cleansing, a painful and humiliating ordeal led by the Sikre. This could involve fasting, ritual washing with bitter herbs, or prolonged silence under watch. The aim is not revenge, it is repair, to scrub the spirit clean before it causes wider harm. Some never return. For certain transgressions, the damage is seen as permanent. To let such a soul remain is to risk a chain of misfortune no ritual can undo. Among the Mentawai, punishment is not about control. It is about protecting the invisible threads that hold life together. And when those threads fray, the soul is the first to suffer. But no punishment is harsher than what waits for those touched by deeper imbalance. Those whom the spirits themselves must confront through the hands of the shaman. In the Mentawai world, the Sikre is more than a healer. He is the bridge between seen and unseen. His word holds the weight of life and death, trusted above reason, feared more than illness. Covered in sacred tattoos and crowned with feathers, the shaman carries the responsibility of the tribe's balance. He listens not only to symptoms, but to spirits. A cough may be a curse, a fever, the sign of a soul slipping away. His cures are not gentle. Jungle roots become medicine, chants become weapons. Animal blood is spilled to appease invisible forces. If he declares that a soul is cursed, no one argues, not even the family of a child. Children, elders, the healthy, the sick, all can be summoned for ritual. If imbalance is sensed, some are healed. Others endure trials that leave permanent marks. In this culture, belief is not symbolic. It is real, and the shaman decides what reality is. There are no trials, no debates, only the shaman's verdict, and the tribe's absolute obedience. For in this isolated world, shaped by spirits and shadows, there is only one law: protect the soul, no matter the cost. Among the Mentawai. The Sigre is the final voice, not elected, not questioned, and never ignored. He speaks not as a man, but as the mouth of the spirits. His decisions are sacred, even when they hurt. Illness is rarely seen as physical. A headache may signal a cursed soul. A child's fever could mean the spirit is slipping away. The Sigre reads the signs in dreams, in animal behavior, in the rhythm of chants whispered into firelight. His tools are leaves soaked in rain, roots pulled from sacred ground, and chants older than memory. But when harmony is broken, healing alone is not enough. He orders rituals that test the body and spirit alike. Fasting, isolation, sacrifice. Even children are not spared if the soul demands it. A single word from the Sigre can summon a rite that reshapes a life. Resistance is unthinkable. To question him is to question the spirits themselves, and that, to the Mentawai, is a threat far more dangerous than pain. In this world where belief is the backbone of life, the shamans, law is not written on paper. It is carved into the skin, etched into the mind, and accepted without doubt. The hidden blood rites of the Minoans, what they never told you centuries before the age of Sparta or Athens. The island of Crete flourished under a different kind of power. The Minoans built a world of polished stone, flowing robes and frescoes that danced with color. They raised great palaces, open to the sea, filled with art, music, and trade. To outsiders, it looked like a paradise. But beneath this elegance pulsed a quiet, unspoken violence. Archaeologists once believed the Minoans were a peaceful people. No city walls, no armies carved into stone. But then came the discoveries: bone pits hidden beneath temple floors. Strange. Double-headed axes buried near children's graves, and ceremonial knives sharpened not for battle, but for sacrifice. The cracks in paradise had always been there, just hidden behind painted smiles. Beneath the palace of Knossos, the largest and most mysterious of Minoan structures, lies a maze of underground chambers. Some believe these formed the inspiration for the myth of the labyrinth, a prison for monsters. But these rooms held no beast, solely silence, darkness, and echoes of fear. Walls carved with sacred spirals led inward, always inward, to sanctuaries stained by time. In those spaces, rituals unfolded in secret rituals never written down, only passed from priest to priest. One fresco shows a bleeding bull, its neck arched mid-slaughter, blood flowing like a ribbon into a stone basin. But some scholars argue the symbolism runs deeper. The bull was sacred, yes, but so was the blood. It wasn't the death that mattered. It was the offering. Life, trained and poured, meant the gods would listen. Across the ruins, clay idols of goddesses were found with arms lifted high, eyes wide open, staring into something beyond. These weren't passive deities. They were fierce, fertile, and demanding. Minoan religion centered around them. But their favor came at a cost. Some remains show signs of blunt trauma. Quick incisions to the neck and ritual burial. Men, women, children, no one truly knows who the chosen ones were. But they were not killed in war. They were given to something greater. Initiation rituals were just as unsettling. Some scholars point to evidence of isolation chambers, where initiates may have been kept in darkness for days, starved, and then brought into the light, blind and trembling, to face a sacred image or a waiting blade. The transformation from human to priest, or from youth to adult, was marked by suffering. Pain wasn't a punishment, it was a passage. The Minoans danced on painted walls. But their movements may have once echoed in blood-soaked chambers. The elegance of their art was a language, and, like all ancient languages, it had to meanings what was shown and what was hidden. Crete wore the mask of a peaceful kingdom. But behind that mask, the cults moved in silence. The blades gleamed in the torchlight, and the gods waited patiently for their share of life, and deep within this maze of belief, one myth would take root: a monster, a prison, and a sacrifice. But as later chapters reveal, the truth of the labyrinth is far stranger than the legend ever told. Beneath the sprawling ruins of Knossos lies a world untouched by sunlight, a warren of chambers, corridors, and stairwells coils through the earth, like veins through flesh, twisting, branching, and doubling back with no clear direction. To the ancients, this was not architecture. It was intention. It was fear carved into stone. Early explorers believed they had found the mythical labyrinth the prison built to house a beast. But the Minotaur was never real. The terror, however, was. Modern archaeologists now suspect these chambers were not meant to trap monsters, but to shape minds. The darkness beneath Knossos wasn't a cage, it was a ritual space. The lack of windows, the tight corners, the echoing footsteps, all designed to disorient. And in the center, a sacred room where something irreversible would take place, Minoan. Initiations weren't symbolic. They were psychological warfare disguised as religion. Young initiates were likely led blindfolded or hooded into the labyrinth, stripped of light, sound, and certainty. Hours, perhaps days, passed in isolation. Hunger set in, time vanished. Walls became impossible to tell from shadows, and when the hood came off, they faced altars, blood markings, or silent masked figures watching from the dark. These weren't punishments. They were transformations to become part of the priesthood or enter adulthood within Minoan cults. One had to first surrender sanity. Fear was the gatekeeper. Blood may have been the offering. Some walls bear signs of repeated impact marks suggesting struggle or deliberate initiation through pain. This wasn't a maze to be solved. It was a ritual journey to survive. And from these dark rites, a legend was born. The tale of a beast in the labyrinth, half man, half animal, devouring children sent as tribute. But perhaps the truth was more human and more horrifying. The beast was fear itself. The children were real. And the blood on the stones wasn't myth, it was memory. To the Minoans, the labyrinth was sacred space. A place where the self was broken and rebuilt under the eyes of forgotten gods. It demanded silence, blood, and the mind's surrender, and those who emerged were no longer the same above ground. The palaces glittered in the sun, but below, in the twisting dark, a secret religion carved its power into the hearts of its people. And if the labyrinth was the body of their faith, then the dance within it was its solar performance, where the cost of misstep could be life itself. That ritual awaits next. In Minoan culture, dance was not merely movement. It was devotion in motion, a sacred offering performed before gods who watched in silence. Across temple walls and pottery shards, painted figures leap, spin, and bend, with a grace that still captivates. But beneath the beauty lay something brutal. These dances were not celebrations, they were trials. Murals found in Knossos and Vaistos depict live bodies in midair, limbs outstretched, faces calm, but skeletal. Remains from nearby ceremonial sites tell a different story: fractured ribs, healed ankle breaks, and deep scars carved long before death. These were not accidents. These were dancers who offered their bodies again and again, not for applause, but for divine approval. Some rituals demanded more than exhaustion in certain rites. Dancers were wounded intentionally as part of the performance. Shallow cuts along the arms, legs, and chest allowed blood to flow as the body moved, tracing patterns onto the earth-like ink from a divine pen. The more one endured, the more powerful the offering became. The bull-leaping ceremony, often romanticized as a sport, may have been once a ritual. Participants hurled themselves toward charging bulls, vaulting over horns with practiced precision. But few walked away unscathed. Horn wounds, trampling injuries, and even death were accepted risks. Pain was not failure, it was devotion. In Minoan belief, The gods were not satisfied with prayer alone. They required proof, and what better proof than the sight of a human body pushed to its limits? Blood mixing with sweat under the temple sun. These dances blurred the line between life and death. Art and agony. It is possible that some performers were chosen from birth, raised for this one purpose, to move until they bled, to collapse in ecstasy or pain beneath the eyes of the goddess, whether male or female, noble or servant. Once the dance began, all were equal in sacrifice. The gods of Crete did not sit in judgment. They waited, and when the drums began, and the dancers spilled blood on sacred ground, the line between offering and offer disappeared. But not all who danced survived, and those who did carried scars not just on the skin but in the soul. Next came those who did not bleed in movement, but ruled over those who did with voices that spoke for gods, and hands that chose who would die. In the world of the Minoans, power wore a woman's face. While other ancient civilizations placed men on thrones and altars, Crete offered a different vision. The high priestess was not a symbol, she was the center, draped in layered skirts. Crowned with serpents or horns, she stood as both oracle and executioner. Minoan frescoes often show women taller than men, standing at the heart of sacred rituals. They hold offerings, lift ceremonial blades, and stand beside blood-marked altars. These weren't decorative roles, they were commands. In flesh, the priestess did not beg the gods for favor, she channeled them. And when the gods demanded life, she spoke the name of the one who must give it. Some rituals involved animal sacrifice, but not all offerings were beasts. Archaeological finds suggest a far more unsettling reality. A charred body of a young male, buried under temple rubble with a ceremonial blade nearby. Hints at a human sacrifice interrupted mid-ritual, perhaps by earthquake, perhaps by fate. The position of the body, and its proximity to ritual tools, has led some to believe the act was priestess-led. The methods weren't always violent. Trance ceremonies played a central role in the Minoan cult. Priestesses may have entered altered states using herbs, smoke, or deep rhythmic movement. In this state, they became the vessel. Utterances from their mouths were not their own, but the voices of gods. Some may have issued death sentences while barely conscious. Their eyes open, but unseng. Poison was another sacred tool. Certain island plants were known to the priest, and some that healed, others that silenced forever. In elite tombs, traces of crushed herbs have been found sealed with remains, possibly administered during final rites. The priestess, not the warrior, decided who left the world and how. This female spiritual dominance reshaped the laws of life and death. Under the eyes of the goddess, the usual hierarchy is dissolved. A king may have ruled by day, but when the moon rose and the fires were lit, it was her voice calm, commanding that the darkness obeyed. The Minoan priestess was not a motherly figure. She was the threshold between this world and the next, and her hands held the knife that opened that gate. Her ceremonies bound entire cities in silence and awe, for in her presence, the living were reminded how thin the line was between breath and burial, and in those bloodlet temples, the bull's shadow always waited for it, too, was sacred, and its fate was soon to come. To the Minoans, no creature held more power or faced more violence than the bull. It charged through their art, their myth, and their sacred spaces. But behind the symbols lay something far darker. The bull was not just a symbol of strength. It was a bridge between mortals and gods, and to cross that bridge, blood had to spill, massive. Horns carved from stone still crowned temple sites like Knossos and Moria. Known as horns of consecration, they weren't decorations, they marked a space as holy, as dangerous. Within these spaces stood altars caked with residue, stained, red over centuries. Nearby, Ceremonial blades with curved edges were buried purposefully, as if to silence the screams that once echoed through the chambers. Ritual texts have not survived, but the bones have. Bull remains found in palace complexes often show deep incisions to the throat and chest, cuts not made in haste, but slowly, with precision. The bloodletting was intentional. It wasn't enough for the bull to die. It had to suffer, to offer its strength through pain. Each drop was believed to carry divine energy power flowing from the bull into the earth, awakening the chthonic gods that slept below. The ceremony was public and sacred. The animal may have been led through the temple grounds, adorned with flowers or painted symbols. Watched by rows of silent followers, as the blade rose, eyes would turn not to the priest, but to the animal itself. Its death was not destruction, it was communion. In some instances, feasting followed, but this was no celebration. It was ritual consumption. Scholars argue that participants may have eaten portions of the bull's flesh in a controlled, symbolic act of shared sacrifice where the gods, the priesthood, and the people partook in unity. And in some rare cases, signs suggest something more troubling. Human bones found near bull remains, marked by similar cut patterns, hint at a disturbing possibility. The line between animal and human sacrifice was not clearly drawn. To the gods, the form may not have mattered, only the offering, the bull, in Minoan belief, embodied both chaos and divinity. Killing it was dangerous, but not killing it was worse. The gods demanded blood, and the bull's power made its death the ultimate gift. It was both victim and messenger, sent into the underworld soaked in sacred pain. And always, the double axe labris waited nearby, a symbol of ritual authority, often wielded by the priestess. It was not a weapon of war, but of ceremony. It did not kill out of anger, but out of obedience. With each bull's death, the gods were fed, the people were bound in belief, and the soil of Crete drank once again. But as Minoan society neared its final days, these rituals grew stranger, more urgent, and more chaotic. Something was unraveling beneath the surface, something no sacrifice could silence. In the final century of Minoan rule, the rituals became louder, darker, and more desperate. Double-axe symbols once reserved for holy spaces began appearing everywhere, on walls, in caves, and carved into the stone near mass graves. Altars grew black with fire. The sacred bull was sacrificed more frequently, and the silence that once followed these ceremonies was broken by a new sound panic. Archaeological layers from this period tell a story of collapse, not just of buildings, but of belief. Beneath the ash of destroyed palaces lie hid burials, of children, some of animals, some of both placed together as if time had run out for a separation. In one site near Animaspilia, a skeleton was found stretched out on a raised platform, arms bound, with a ceremonial blade nearby. This was not myth. This was a final sacrifice caught in the act. Traces of intense fire damage burned pillars. Blackened stairwells and collapsed sanctuaries suggest that some temples were not destroyed by invaders but by the Minoans themselves. It was as if the faithful believed the gods had turned away, and in return they lit their most sacred spaces on fire. Then, without warning, the ceremonies stopped. The volcano at their modern-day Santorini erupted with a fury unmatched in the ancient world. Ash darkened the sky. Tsunamis swept across. The sea and coastal temples were swallowed whole. The Minoan heart cracked open, and its cults vanished with it. No new sacrifices followed. No altars were rebuilt. But while the priestesses disappeared, their symbols lived on. The labris, the double axe once raised in sacred rites, reappeared in Greek myth, held by goddesses like Demeter and Persephone, divinities tied to the underworld and rebirth. The bull became the Minotaur, cursed and imprisoned, a distorted echo of a once holy creature, and the labyrinth itself turned from ritual passage to nightmare prison. These myths were not inventions. They were memories, twisted by time and fear. The Greeks inherited the land, but they inherited something else, too. Fragments of cult knowledge, scattered through story and shrine. The final Minoan cult didn't vanish. It dissolved into legend. Buried under pumice and fear, and perhaps that was the last ritual of all to be forgotten by name, but remembered by myth. Today, the ruins of Knossos remain open to the sun. Tourists walk where priestesses once ruled, and frescoes smile down with painted calm. But deep in the earth, the passageways still twist, untouched by centuries. The silence there is total, thick with memory. What began as beauty became blood. What was sacred became feared, and what was once real vanished in smoke, only to rise again in the stories that still haunt the edges of Western memory. The Mitanni Clan, secrets of a forgotten tribe and their chilling rituals in the dry winds of the ancient Near East, where kingdoms rose from dust and vanished into myth. One empire stood apart not for its size, but for its strange soul. The Mitanni, a forgotten warrior tribe turned ruling class, carved out their legacy in fire, fate, and blood. At their height, they commanded chariots faster than the storm, horses trained with almost sacred precision, and kings who swore loyalty, not to men, but to gods with fire burning names. The Mitanni didn't just ride horses, they worshipped them. They believed the soul of a warrior god lived inside every stallion's body. Horses were fed like royalty, bathed in fragrant oils, and blessed before battle. But that reverence turned dark when it came to sacrifice. Before major events, treaties, wars, coronations, the most prized animals weren't honored. They were slaughtered in ritual pits, deep beneath sun-baked earth. Horses were bled into sacred troughs, their life drained in silence. The blood was stirred with wine and spices, then poured over altars, soaked into weapons, all on rare occasions drunk in solemn oaths. These ceremonies weren't just tradition, they were belief. The Mitanni saw blood as more than life. It was power, passed through generations like fire from one torch to the next. Only those of noble bloodlines were considered fit to rule or even speak the names of their gods. Children born outside the pure line were hidden, disowned, or worse, offered in fire rituals meant to purify the tribe's connection to heaven. In this society, ancestry wasn't just a record, it was destiny carved into bone. Their gods were borrowed, yet feared as their own. Names like Mitra, Indra, Varuna deities from distant lands loomed large in Mitanni temples. These weren't forgiving gods. They demanded obedience, control, sacrifice. Every action, every breath, was watched by divine eyes that punished arrogance and impurity. To break a ritual meant cursing not just oneself, but an entire lineage. This fear bled into their laws. Spiritual failure was seen as political treason. If a priest failed to read omens correctly, or a warrior defied ritual timing, punishment came swiftly. Sometimes it meant death. Other times, exile into the desert where spirits, they believed, would torment the impure until madness took over. The mind, like the body, had to be cleansed by suffering. Yet the strangest part of their legacy lives not in what they built, but in what they controlled, the will. The Mitanni believed true strength came not from force, but from the ability to control the spirit of animals, of enemies, of themselves. And at the center of that belief was the oath ritual that demanded blood, silence, and submission to fate. But not all oaths were spoken between equals. Some demanded something more dangerous, the mixing of blood. In the Mitanni world, loyalty was never left to trust alone. It was carved into skin, sealed in blood. and offered to gods who never forgot. When kings of rival lands met to form alliances, there were no signatures, no scrolls. Instead, there was a bowl filled with a dark mixture of wine, sacrificial animal blood, and sacred herbs offered beneath the gaze of gods like Mitra and Varuna, the enforcers of cosmic law. The ritual was called Raza, a binding oath that demanded not just words, but the drinking of blood. Both rulers would cut their palms, letting their blood mingle into the vessel. The shared liquid, believed to fuse souls, was consumed in silence as it passed through their bodies. It was said to summon unseen forces, spirits of judgment, guardians of fate who would haunt the one who broke the pact to the Mitanni. Such a betrayal wasn't political, it was spiritual suicide. They believed the blood of a broken vow grew bitter inside the traitor's veins, cursing him with disease, madness, or sudden death. The gods of the oath were merciless. They did not wait for armies or poison. They punished in silence, stripping a man of his name, his mind, and finally, his soul. This fear gave the Mitanni unmatched power in diplomacy. Even the great kings of Babylon and Egypt approached these ceremonies with trembling respect. Refusing the ritual was considered an insult. To the gods, a declaration of war. Accepting it meant surrendering one's fate to something far more terrifying than swords. The location of these pacts was sacred, often beneath open sky. Where stars witnessed the ritual and winds carried the vow to higher realms, priests stood nearby, chanting verses in ancient dialects, calling down the divine. No bystander could speak. No outsider could watch. Breaking that silence was seen as an omen, one that usually ended in bloodshed. But not every king honored his vow, and when a pact was broken, the Mitanni didn't always seek revenge with armies. They believed the gods would find the oathbreaker wherever he hid dot among the Mitanni. Birth was not a blessing, it was a test. The moment a child entered the world, its fate no longer rested in the hands of its parents. It belonged to fire, smoke, and silence, in a secluded chamber near the temples. Far from the chants of celebration, infants were brought before flickering flames to face their first judgment, not of body, but of soul. The ritual was simple, but merciless. A brazier was lit with sacred oils and herbs, believed to call upon divine presence. The newborn was held above the smoke, its tiny lungs exposed to the purifying scent of burning cedar, sulfur, and crushed myrrh. The watchers, usually elder priests and midwives, observed closely. If the baby remained calm, silent, or still, it was seen as a sign of purity. But if the child whimpered, coughed, or trembled, it was declared impure, marked by weakness or spiritual pollution. This was not superstition. It was belief, rooted in the tribe's obsession with bloodlines and divine will. They taught that the gods chose vessels through which fate could continue. A child who failed the trial wasn't simply sickly, it was seen as cursed. Some were sent away, hidden in isolation. Others were left outside temple walls, abandoned to the will of nature and gods alike. To outsiders, this cruelty would seem barbaric, but to the Mitanni, it was protection of their legacy, their line, and their gods. They feared impurity not just in flesh, but in spirit. A single flawed soul, they believed, could rot the strength of an entire generation. What made the ritual even more chilling was the silence that followed. No mourning, no burial, no names spoken for those who failed. These children were erased not just from records, but from memory. The tribe moved on, convinced the gods had made their choice. For the Mitanni, survival wasn't a right. It was earned in fire, and in this trial by smoke, destiny had no mercy. But while infants faced flames to prove purity, others older, conscious, Terrified were taken to gods of the Mitanni were not content with worship, they wanted obedience of thought. To them, true devotion meant surrendering not just action, but identity. The divine didn't merely rule the skies, they ruled the mind, and those who served them were expected to become vessels, emptied of doubt, fear, or self. In the heart of the kingdom stood temples where silence was enforced like law. Here, initiates were brought not to pray, but to be reshaped. These were not criminals or enemies. They were chosen, sons of noble blood, daughters of priests, warriors destined for sacred rules. Yet before they could serve, they had to be broken. The ritual began with isolation. Days turned to weeks inside dark stone chambers, where no voice reached and no sunlight touched skin. Food was minimal. Water was blessed with herbs that dulled thought and weakened the body. At night, chants echoed through cracks in the walls, slow, repetitive mantras invoking Mitra, Varuna, and Indra until the words looped inside the mind like iron chains. Some resisted. They cried out, struck the walls, begged for release. But resistance, in the eyes of the priests, was impurity revealing itself, and the gods demanded it be burned away. Those who emerged were hollow-eyed and silent. Their gestures were slow, their speech reduced to ritual phrases. Elders said this was enlightenment, a state where the self had dissolved, and only fate remained. But to those who observed from beyond the temple walls, it looked more like the aftermath of a war within. This mind-stripping devotion wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was the Mitanni's way of maintaining cosmic order. In their worldview, chaos began in the mind. To prevent it, the will had to be subdued until nothing remained but obedience to divine will. But for those who failed these trials, the punishment was not cleansing. It was erasure by suffering, and for some, that erasure came in the cruelest form: slow starvation and eternal silence. In the Mitanni world, death by blade was reserved for warriors. But those accused of betrayal, disloyalty, or spiritual corruption faced a punishment far more feared, one that erased the soul before the body. They called it the hollowing. A silent ritual meant not to kill, but to undo a person from within. There were no public executions, no last words. Instead, the condemned were taken below into earth-dug chambers beneath temple grounds, where no sound escaped. The floors were cold, the walls were bare, and the only companion was silence. No food was offered, no water, no prayers, only time. To the Mitanni, this was not abandonment. It was sacred suffering. They believed that by removing all earthly attachments, light, sound, nourishment, a soul was stripped bare, made visible to the gods of the underworld. In this state, the person became an offering, not just a prisoner. Their agony was a kind of incense rising through stone to please divine judgment. Priests called this the path of shadows. Outsiders might see it as cruelty, but within the Mitanni belief system, silence was a mirror, and starvation a fire that revealed the truth of a person's soul. If the gods saw fit, it was whispered, they could take the spirit early, releasing the body from pain. But more often, the person faded, slowly forgotten by the tribe, and seen and heard and mourned. This form of punishment was not reserved for murderers or enemies. Sometimes, a misplaced wood, a broken ritual, or a failed omen could condemn even nobles to the chambers. There was no appeal, only the slow unraveling of life in darkness. It was not execution. It was erasure. And yet, even after death, the Mitanni believed the soul of a traitor wandered without name, lost between worlds. But long before the empire collapsed, a deeper erasure began, one that no ritual could control. The vanishing of the Mitanni legacy itself. The fall of the Mitanni kingdom did not come with fire or conquest alone. It came quietly, like breath fading in the dark. What once stood as a proud empire, armed with chariots, blood oaths, and divine order, dissolved into scattered ruins and fractured names. No grand tombs, no final monument, only traces buried beneath centuries of silence. Scholars still argue over the cause. Some say invasion by rival empires crushed the Mitanni under the weight of foreign rule. Others point to political betrayal and royal fractures. But deeper voices whisper a different theory, one written not in weapons, but in ritual. A society built on fear, silence, and divine control can only bend so far before it breaks. The Mitanni mindset demanded obedience to fate, suppression of the self, and punishment for even silent dissent. Every birth was judged, every thought watched. In a world where every mistake was seen as a cosmic flaw, innovation froze, freedom disappeared, trust cracked from within. The gods they worshipped promised order, but perhaps gave them collapse. Texts found on crumbling tablets speak of omens gone wrong, priesthoods fighting for control, and nobles turning to forbidden rituals to maintain power. These weren't signs of strength, they were signals of unraveling. When the spiritual framework is held too tightly, it becomes a cage, and cages cannot survive the chaos of the outside world. As their neighbors advanced, forged alliances, and adapted, the Mitanni stayed bound to a vision of destiny that had no room for change. Their oaths became burdens, their purity became poison, and slowly, the empire bled out not through war, but through stagnation. Yet echoes remain in the ancient hymns of other cultures, in the fire rituals passed down through distant tongues, in the fear of breaking a vow. The Mitanni are gone, but their obsession with fate, the belief that some are born to rule and others to suffer still, lingers in the shadows of history. Their gods demanded silence, and in the end, silence claimed them. The blood of the sun, dark rituals and punishments of the Mixtec Priests in the highlands of ancient Mesoamerica, where the mountains burned beneath an endless sky. The Mixtec Priests ruled not with swords but with blood. These were not holy men of silence and prayer. They were flesh offerers, pain bringers, keepers of the knife, and in their eyes the sun itself was hungry to feed it. They turned to their own bodies first. Bloodletting wasn't a punishment. It was a sacred language spoken in drops and rivers. Each sunrise demanded sacrifice. Before the people awoke, the priests had already pierced their tongues with obsidian blades. They tore open their ears with bone needles. They dragged stingray spines through their genitals, not to die, but to bleed beautifully, offering their sufferings morning tribute. The Mixtecs believed that only through pain could the gods be reminded to keep the world turning. Their temples were stained with generations of this devotion, stone walls darkened with the dried blood of those who believed the divine lived inside agony. On festival days, the priests went further. Strips of skin were cut and burned as incense. The smoke, they believed, carried prayers faster than any word could. But not all blood was priestly. Captives were paraded in silence before crowds, stripped of name and meaning. On the altar stones, their chests were torn open with jagged obsidian. Still beating hearts were held up to the sky, not for cruelty, but for balance. The Mixtecs feared the sun might fall if it wasn't fed properly. The priests, guardians of that cosmic debt, made sure it never starved. They drank the blood not as beasts, but as intermediaries. To consume it was to take in the life force of gods and mortals alike. It was communion with the sky, the soil, and the flames of the underworld. Each gulp whispered of order, sacrifice, and eternal vigilance. These priests were not seen as monsters. They were sacred bridges between pain and peace, horror and harmony. Without their rituals, the crops would fail, the rain would dry up, the world would fall into silence, and so They bled again and again until their bodies became walking scars, maps of devotion carved in living flesh. But blood was only the beginning for the Mixtecs. True transformation meant more than bleeding. It meant shedding, wearing, becoming dot in the Mixtec world. Death was not an end, it was a doorway. And for the god Zapotec, that doorway required a brutal key, human skin. Known as the Flayed One, Zapotec was the god of rebirth, disease, and agricultural renewal. To honor him, the priests performed one of the most disturbing rituals in all of Mesoamerican culture. Captives, often warriors from rival tribes, were selected not for who they were in life, but for what they would become in death. Vessels of divine transformation, stripped naked and bound. The chosen were flayed alive. Their skins were peeled, slowly, with obsidian blades that cut more than flesh they carved belief. The victims' screams were absorbed into the ritual, considered sacred music echoing into the ears of the gods. Death was not rushed. It had to arrive with reverence. But the ritual did not end with death. The priests then dressed themselves in the bloody skins of the flayed, stepping into them like sacred robes. These grotesque garments hung loosely, still slick with warmth, the eyes and lips stitched shut with care. For 20 days, the priests walked among the people as living effigies of Zapotec. Children were told not to scream, for the walking skins were blessings, not curses. Women laid offerings at their feet. Farmers touched the hem of the flayed flesh, believing it would bring rain. The decaying skin symbolized the old world being shed, just as corn sheds its husk before growth. To the Mixtec mind, this was not horror, it was harmony. Rot brought life, suffering birthed renewal. In their mythology, even the gods had once worn skin that wasn't their own. By the final day of the ritual, the skins were buried beneath new crops, all burned with sacred incense, returning the borrowed flesh to the cycle of life. For outsiders, it may seem like madness, but for the Mixtec priests, it was devotion made visible, faith draped over bone. And while this ritual wanted rebirth, others served darker ends. Some demanded blindness, silence, and pain beyond flesh, for in their path to divine vision, the eyes were often the first to go among the Mixtec priests. Vision was not a gift of the eyes, it was a punishment of the soul. To see the will of the gods, one first had to surrender the human senses that blurred it, and no sense was more mistrusted than sight. In the sacred chambers of their temples, the path to divine vision began with fire. Priests prepared paste made from crushed chilies, lime ash, and resin. This blinding mixture was smeared into open eyes, igniting an internal inferno. The pain was instant and absolute, searing nerves, melting tears, and boiling silence. Some went blind forever. Others only saw shadows that danced like spirits across their scorched retinas. But blindness was not failure. It was transcendence. Those who endured the burning pain were believed to open a new eye, not of flesh, but of spirit. In these altered states, priests claimed to hear gods whispering through smoke, or see futures carved into the sky. The agony silenced the world round them, leaving only the divine voice within. Pain wasn't endured, it was worshipped. Thorns were sometimes used for added clarity. Pushed beneath the eyelids or through the skin beside the temples, they served as spiritual antennas, meant to pierce through illusion and call down sacred visions. Blood mixed with ash, breath slowed to a whisper, and within that darkness, belief took shape. These rituals weren't hidden, they were celebrated. Villagers fasted in reverence. Elders repeated the stories of priests who had stared into the sun until their vision turned black, only to return as prophets. The priests walked among them, blind and burned, yet revered as those who had seen more than any other. For the Mixtecs, true sight could only come from destruction, but when vision turned to sacrifice, The next ritual followed one even sharper, even closer to the gods, because the gods did not only demand eyes. They demanded blood. To the Mixtec, blood was not just a substance, it was a sacred offering, a bridge between humans and gods, and only the most personal pain could build that bridge. The priests called it opening the sky, but the sky did not open with prayers. It opened with knives, obsidian blades, sharper than steel and black as night, were the tools of this devotion. Some rituals began before dawn, when the air was still and the world held its breath. A priest would press the blade to his tongue, cutting deeply, letting the blood drip onto bark paper that would later be burned. Its smoke carrying prayers skyward. The gods of fire demanded flame, the gods of rain demanded blood. The Mixtecs gave both. But this was only the beginning. For greater blessings, priests pierced their lobes, cheeks, and genitals with stingly spines or thorns, the more sensitive the flesh. The louder the gods listened. Pain wasn't hidden, it was invited. The sight of a priest trembling from blood loss was not weakness, but strength. It proved willingness to speak in the gods' chosen language. Suffering, the ritual was deliberate. Each cut followed cosmic patterns, directions marked by stars, symbols of serpents and jaguars drawn in blood. The body became a sacred map. Each wound a path toward divine attention. The Mixtecs believed that the gods had once bled to create the world, so humans had to bleed to keep it alive. It was reciprocity, not punishment. Sacrifice was not death, it was life restored. Those too weak to perform their own offerings could ask priests to cut for them. The priests became surgeons of faith, opening skin not to harm, but to heal the balance between the mortal and the divine. And still, some rituals went further, for while blood could open the sky, it could not always open truth. To hear the gods more clearly. Some priests called upon the dead, because in the Mixtec world, silence did not belong to the grave. It belonged to the corpses forced to speak again. In the Mixtec world, the grave was not always a place of rest. Some were buried with ceremony, others with silence, but a few were never allowed to stay buried at all. For when the gods refused to answer, the priests turned to those who could not protest, the dead. The belief ran deep that the spirits of the condemned, especially those executed for betrayal or sacrilege, still held truths the living could not reach. These were not ghosts in the wind. They were bodies exhumed from the earth, dressed in ceremonial robes, painted with crushed bone and ash, and brought before the people like statues with secrets. Eyes hollow, mouths sewn half open with red thread. The corpses were treated not with fear, but with reverence and awe, adorned with feathers, shells, and sacred dyes. They became sacred objects, vessels that could carry divine messages or warnings. It was believed that the gods could speak through their still forms, using rot as a conduit and silence as a tool. The ceremonies varied. Some involved priests whispering into the corpse's ear, then interpreting its response through the crackle of fire, the movement of smoke, or the twitching of limbs caused by decay. Others placed offerings in the corpse's mouth, stones, herbs, ashes, believing they would carry the message back to the underworld gods, who would return answers through dreams, droughts, or plagues. To the Mixtec mind, death was not the end of responsibility. Even in decay, a soul could be held accountable, forced to participate in rituals long after life had ended. The dead could bless crops or curse villages. Their silence could mark divine approval or serve as an omen. But not all spirits were willing, and when the world needed more than silence or smoke, when innocence was required to guard the sacred, the priests turned to a new kind of sacrifice, not the old, not the damned. In the silent heart of Mixtec temples, beneath layers of stone and centuries of prayer, lay the smallest protectors of all, Children never named in public, never mourned aloud, were buried beneath sacred foundations. Their deaths were not accidents. They were offerings. The Mixtec believed that innocence held divine power. And like adults, children had not yet sinned, lied, or disobeyed the gods. Their purity made them sacred vessels, capable of anchoring spiritual energy to the earth. When a new temple was built, it was common for priests to select children as guardians of the site. Their bodies, hidden deep beneath the first stone, were thought to ensure protection, prosperity, and peace. Some were sacrificed quietly, their blood spilled before burial. Others were placed alive into small stone chambers, left with maize, feathers, or jade symbolic gifts meant to ease their passage into the spirit world. The earth was sealed above them. No screams were heard. Silence was the final ritual dot to the Mixtec people. These children were not simply lost. They became part of the architecture, woven into the bones of temples that would last for generations. Their spirits were believed to watch over the sacred, to listen for blasphemy, and to whisper warnings from below. No markers stood above their graves. No names survived. Only the priests knew where the bones rested. And still, the cycle continued, because for the Mixtec priests, even death had to end with purpose. Even silence had to serve the gods. But when the ritual demanded the ultimate sacrifice, not just of body or youth, but of the soul itself, the priests turned inward, toward their own final trial. A slow, chosen death meant to echo across eternity, when their work was done, when the blood had dried, the gods had been fed, and the temple stood on bones. The Mixtec priests turned toward the final ritual, their own death. This was not a fall from power. It was its peak in the last stage of life. A priest would retreat into isolation, deep within mountain caves or sealed temple chambers. They fasted in silence, surrounded by smoke, ash, and the lingering scent of blood. No mourners were allowed. No food passed their lips. Water was taken only as ritual. It was believed that each day of suffering peeled away the body's impurities, drawing the soul closer to divine form. As the body weakened, visions grew stronger. Fever was seen as a gift. Trembling limbs were not signs of death, but of the soul stepping beyond. The flesh, the priests welcomed it. They recorded final thoughts in glyphs or murmured them to apprentices through cracked lips. Last messages passed like torches in the dark. Their final breath was not feared, it was offered. The moment of death was seen as a doorway into the realm of God's, a surrender not of power, but a transformation into it. Their bones remained where they fell, often untouched, often entombed in sacred ash, even in their end. The priests remained in control. No blade took them, no illness claimed them. They walked willingly into silence, believing that the slower the death, the louder the gods would hear it. And so the Mixtec world stood built on blood, guarded by the dead, and watched over by those who gave their final breath not in fear, but in power. The blood rituals of the Moche. When gods demanded human faces in the bone-dry deserts of ancient Peru, where rainfall was scarce and the earth cracked beneath the sun, a civilization rose not from abundance, but from defiance. The Moche did not wait for nature's favor. They carved canals through stone, bent rivers to their will, and painted their temples with the stories of gods who demanded more than prayer. Their mastery over water turned barren dust into farmland. But beneath this brilliance flowed something darker. Power was never separated from pain. At the heart of the Moche world stood massive pyramids, not built for burial, but for blood. Walls were decorated with painted warriors, open-throated captives, and gods with fangs. These were not symbols. They were instructions. The Moche believed the world was held together by sacrifice. Blood was a bridge, Without it, crops withered, the sun hid, and disaster struck, and so they offered what they believed the gods craved most, human flesh, taken not from strangers, but from their own kind. Priests dressed in jaguar pelts and feathered robes would descend into ceremonial, pits lined with murals of torment. There, the chosen ones, prisoners of war, dishonored nobles, or unlucky villagers, were bound, bled, and presented before shrines as gifts, not in shame, but in solemn pride, death. In the Moche belief system was conceived a divine balance. Archaeologists found skulls pierced by ritual blades, spines twisted in post-sacrifice rigor, and altars stained so deeply that centuries could not wash them clean. One temple, known today as Hokudiloluna, revealed layers upon layers of offerings, bones, blood-soaked garments, and ceremonial knives still sharp from use. The Moche had no written language. Instead, their beliefs lived in their pottery, painted scenes of decapitations, ceremonial drinking from skulls, and warriors holding heads by the hair, not with hatred, but reverence. In their eyes, a severed head was not a trophy. It was a sacred vessel. Power and terror walked hand in hand. Those who controlled sacrifice controlled the seasons. Those who bled others became the mouthpiece of the gods, and those who refused, they simply vanished, swallowed by sand, forgotten by history, until the bones began to speak again. As new discoveries unearthed not only warriors but priestesses drenched in blood rituals. One truth became clear. Moche violence was not chaos. It was organized, calculated, and deeply spiritual. But this was only the beginning, because the Moche didn't just kill in worship. They drank the blood to dot in Moche culture. The battlefield was not a place of conquest. It was a sacred arena where the gods watched, and warriors became instruments of divine hunger. Victories were not measured in land, but in blood. A man's worth was not proven by how many lived beneath his rule, but by how many bled at his feet. Moche warriors fought with precision, not to kill outright, but to capture, stripped of their armor. Enemies were paraded in ritual chains, their humiliation as important as their defeat. They were marched to temples, hands bound, eyes wide, knowing that their final role was not that of a soldier, but an offering. The captives were led before the elite. High priests and priest kings sat on elevated platforms, watching as warriors reenacted sacred duels using real blades. These weren't battles of hate. They were ceremonies of order. One man would fall, and his blood would be drained into ornate goblets, often decorated with snarling deities and skeletal faces. That blood, still warm, was carried up the steps of the pyramid. There, in front of a crowd, the priest-king would raise the goblet and drink, not in secrecy, but in sacred ritual. To consume the blood was to consume the enemy's spirit, to absorb his strength, his courage, and his pain. In the Moche worldview, this act was not cannibalistic. It was cosmic. Pottery recovered from tombs shows these rituals in graphic detail. Kneeling prisoners, blades slicing open throats, and attendants catching blood in vessels shaped like jaguar mounts. In one depiction, the priest's eyes roll upward as he drinks, a trance, perhaps, or possession to the Moche. War was not chaos. It was necessary harvest. Crops fed the body. But blood fed the soul of the world. Without sacrifice, the balance would fail, and so each warrior returned from battle not with spoils, but with a captive, a living sacrifice, a gift for the gods. But the thirst never ended. The gods demanded more, and in time, the Moche would turn not just to warriors, but to entire classes of society, nobles, women, even children, as the blood ritual spread like a storm across the empire. At the heart of the Moche world stood, two towering monuments, the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of the Moon. But these were not houses of peace. They were engines of sacrifice, their steps stained red by centuries of blood offerings. Every stone whispered a silent scream, and every corner told of lives given not in rage, but in ritual, buried deep beneath the layered floors of the temples. Archaeologists uncovered remains of young victims, some no older than 15. Their bodies were not thrown or discarded. They were placed with care, ranged in fetal positions or faced upward, as if waiting for something. Their deaths were not random, but calculated, woven into a spiritual calendar that governed every season, every storm, and every breath of wind. The Moche believed the gods spoke through nature. A flood was fury, a drought was punishment, and in return, humans had one form of communication, blood, each year. Depending on omens read in the stars, the rivers, and the cries of animals, a ritual was planned. Not one, but many. A cycle of death in exchange for a life. Some victims were strangled. Others were bled slowly, and some, especially during long droughts, were sacrificed en masse. One layer of excavation revealed over 70 individuals, all buried at once, their bones twisted in a final moment of agony. Round them were ceremonial items, shell necklaces, obsidian blades, and painted ceramics that seemed to record the ritual as it unfolded. The higher the crisis, the greater the offering. During a particularly devastating El Niño event, the Moche are believed to have sacrificed entire groups at once, hoping their cries would rise like smoke into the heavens. The priest stood atop the pyramid, arms lifted, chanting, while far below, the earth drank deeply from the wounds of the innocent. These were not executions. They were acts of devotion. The blood that soaked into the pyramid steps was seen as seed for the sky. An offering to awaken rain, to soften the sun, to keep the world from cracking apart. But even the most sacred sacrifices could not guarantee mercy. And when the sky stayed silent, the Moche only dug deeper. The rituals intensified. The gods demanded more than blood. They wanted the soul beneath the skin, and soon the Moche turned to even darker rites, where not just death, but transformation awaited those chosen for the altar. Among the most chilling discoveries in Moche tombs were not the bones or blades, but the absence of faces. Skulls, still intact, bore precise cut marks where skin had once been. Eyeless sockets and toothless jaws stared upward in eternal silence. These were not victims of battle. These were chosen offerings, prepared with surgical focus. Their humanity peeled away like a mask before death. The Moche believed the face carried power, not just identity, but spirit. The skin round the eyes, the shape of the mouth, even the curve of the cheekbones were thought to contain the essence of a person's soul. To remove the face was to strip the self from the body. Releasing it for divine use, this act was not seen as mutilation. It was purification. Before the ritual, the victim was bathed, adorned, and sometimes drugged with hallucinogenic substances to induce stillness. Priests with obsidian knives worked with terrifying precision, removing the skin, without shattering the skull beneath. The face, once removed, was wrapped and placed on altars or burnt as an offering. In some cases, it was buried beneath the pyramid, fed directly into the earth. What remained was not left bare. Over the exposed bones, the Moche placed masks made of hammered gold, shaped to mimic divine expressions, wide eyes, flared nostrils, snarling lips. These were not replicas of human faces. They were faces of gods. In the eyes of the Moche, the body became a vessel, emptied of its former self and filled with something greater. The golden masks shimmered in torchlight, turning death into spectacle. These transformed bodies were then displayed or buried ceremonially, surrounded by offerings of feathers, shells, and ritual tools. Even in death, they were believed to serve, guardians between the mortal world and the sacred beyond. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was a spiritual contract. Pain was the price of transcendence, and to lose one's face was to become faceless, to step beyond identity, beyond ego, into the realm of the divine. But as the rites grew stranger, the line between sacrifice and spectacle blurred. And in the sacred hands of priestesses, death would take on an entirely new shape, not only accepted, but orchestrated with fearsome precision. In the Moche world, power did not belong to men alone. Beneath the shadow of pyramids and within the sacred chambers, women stood cloaked in feathers and crowned with jaguar fangs, not as servants, but as priestesses of blood. Their rituals were not hidden. They were performed before crowds, their authority etched into bone and gold, feared as much as it was obeyed. These women did not plead for rain or peace. They summoned it through sacrifice, their robes stitched with shell and bone, swung heavily as they moved through the ceremonial platforms. In their hands, obsidian blades gleamed, not for healing, but for ending. Moche art shows them standing beside bound captives, pouring blood into ritual goblets, their faces emotionless beneath painted masks. When their tombs were uncovered, the evidence spoke louder than words. One priestess was found buried with a ceremonial blade, 10 severed hands ranged beside her, and a golden goblet placed at her feet. The positioning was deliberate, the message clear. This was not a victim. This was a ruler of death, skilled in reading omens, tracking lunar cycles, and interpreting signs from animals and dreams. These women chose who would live and who would be given to the gods. Their rituals followed the moon's phases, with the bloodiest ceremonies held during lunar eclipses, events seen not as celestial accidents, but divine messages. During these nights, the priestesses ruled without question. Some victims were chosen from the lowest ranks. Others came from nobility, offered in exchange for favor or absolution. The priestess's role was not emotional. It was mathematical. Death was a formula, and they knew its weight in drops. Their power came not from fear alone, but from belief. The people trusted them to speak the will of the gods, to maintain balance, to sacrifice wisely. And when the crops failed, or the rivers turned against the villagers, it was the priestesses who led the way, knives drawn, eyes fixed on the sky. They were not symbols of fertility or softness. They were keepers of the threshold, fierce, silent, and absolute. But even their authority would be tested. As the skies grew darker, the floods more violent, and the rituals more desperate, soon the gods would demand more than blood. They would demand everything. As the final centuries of the Moche era unfolded, the skies turned against them. Rivers once stained by canals overflowed in punishing floods. Crops withered beneath sudden droughts. The earth trembled, breaking apart temples and homes alike. The signs were clear to the Moche. The gods were no longer pleased. In response, the rituals became more extreme. Where once 1 or 2 victims had been enough, entire groups were now sacrificed in single ceremonies. Mass graves began to appear, not hidden, but placed near temples. As warnings or final pleas, bodies were younger, wounds more violent. Some had been drained dry, others dismembered with brutal precision. Each one was meant to buy forgiveness. But forgiveness never came. The priests, once revered, began offering sacrifices more frequently. With greater force, skeletons bearing signs of torture appeared alongside ceremonial artifacts, proof that pain had become part of the offering. The people obeyed, terrified. If the gods would not listen to reason, perhaps they would listen to screams. Even the priestesses turned to dark omens, Lunar eclipses were no longer events of reflection, but commands for mass executions. During these blood moons, entire communities gathered in silence as rows of victims were led forward, eyes wide with horror, bound not by rope, but by belief. And still, the floods returned. The harvests fail. The gods remained silent. Faith twisted into frenzy. Some villages were abandoned, their temples defaced, their altars shattered. Others became haunted by the scent of blood, sacrifice continuing even after hope had died. Archaeologists found entire ritual chambers burned and sealed, as if the people had tried to bury the gods they once worshipped. In the end, the Moche civilization collapsed not from war, but from fear. Fear that the gods had turned their backs, fear that the rituals had lost their power, fear that no offering, no matter how brutal, could mend a world unraveling at its seams. Only the bones remain now, scattered across dunes, sealed beneath temples and painted on ceramics once held by trembling hands. They speak of a people who gave everything and still lost everything. But their story does not fade. It lingers in the silence left behind, where once the gods were fed by blood, and the desert winds carried the final prayers of a dying empire. The tribe that stretches beauty with pain. Inside the Mursi rituals of blood and honor in the blistering heat of Ethiopia's Omo Valley, a silent code is carved into the flesh of an ancient people. Among the Mursi, pain is not a curse, is currency. Scars speak louder than words. Blood is not lost. It is offered. Here, suffering is not a weakness, but a badge of belonging. At the heart of Mursi belief lies a ritual so jarring it halts outsiders in disbelief. Girls, Yanas, 13, have their lower lips pierced, a deep slit made with a blade, then pried open with wooden plugs. Over time, the opening is stretched wider and wider. Eventually, the round clay plate is forced into the wound, not once, but again and again. Each time, the lip is torn further. Reshaped by grit and expectation, some plates reach 6 inches across wider than the palm of a grown man's hand. This isn't fashion. It is value measured in cattle, in marriage deals, in family honor. The larger the plate, the higher the bride price, and the more pain she endures, the more her strength is praised. A woman's worth, here, is displayed not in words or wealth, but in how much she has suffered without flinching. The smile may disappear, but in its place grows a kind of power. From Mursi boys, the body becomes a battlefield long before adulthood. Scarring rituals begin early. Sharp razors are used to slice patterns into their chests, arms, and backs. These marks are not decorative. They are history written on skin. Each line speaks of trials faced, punishments taken, and pain survived without tears. A scarred body is a respected one. A smooth one is questioned. In a world where Western comforts do not reach. The Mursi have built a system where pain is the path to honor, where the body becomes the message, and where survival means submission not just to the land, but to the harsh rules of tradition. To outsiders, it seems brutal, but within the tribe, it is sacred law. A mother will press her daughter's shoulder and say, "Endure it. It is who we are." A father will look at his son's bloodied chest and nod with pride. There are no medals in the Mursi tribe, only wounds that heal into memory. But these rituals are just the beginning, for in the Mursi world, pain does more than build identity. It forges unbreakable bonds between warriors, brothers, and blood. In the harsh lands of the Omo Valley, where the sun burns deep into the skin and survival is a daily negotiation, the Mursi tribe has shaped a definition of masculinity unlike any other. Among the Mursi, manhood is not spoken. It is cut, carved, and bled into being from a young age. Boys are taught the oldest form of loyalty, pain shared in silence. in this tribe, friendship is not given freely. It is earned through bloodletting, a ritual that transforms boys into brothers and strangers into allies. With sharpened blades, young men slice deep into their arms, shoulders, or stomachs, drawing their clines of blood. The wounds are not bandaged. They are left open, exposed, as if to say, "This is what I've given for you." There is no ceremony, no drums, only the sound of skin tearing under steel, and the stillness of eyes that refuse to blink. The more a man bleeds, the more trust he builds, the deeper the wound, the louder the unspoken bond. Among the Mursi, to bleed is to be seen. To bleed without flinching is to be respected. This bloodletting is not an attack, it is a gesture. It is performed during feasts, warrior gatherings, or moments of deep personal commitment. A Mursi man may offer his own blood to seal a pact, resolve a conflict, or show loyalty that cannot be undone, in a place where words carry little weight. It is the body that speaks loudest. Dot scars from these rituals remain for life. They are maps of past allegiances, markers of past courage. In battle or in dispute, a man's wounds tell his story long before his voice ever does, and in this tribal world, a man without scars is not feared. He is forgotten. To the modern world, these acts may seem savage, but within the Mursi culture, they are sacred traditions, proof that trust must cost something real. And for those who carry the cuts, it is not pain they remember most, but the brotherhood that followed, because in the Mursi tribe, bleeding together is the only way to truly stand together. In the Mursi tribe, womanhood is not defined by age, but by endurance, by how much pain the body can absorb and how proudly it can carry that pain into public view. For Mursi girls, the journey into adulthood begins with a blade and a belief passed down through generations. Around the age of 15, a girl's lower lip is sliced open with a sharp knife. A small wooden plug is inserted into the fresh wound to keep it from healing shut. Over weeks, then months, the plug is replaced with larger discs, eventually traded for the iconic clay plate. As the lip stretches unnaturally, skin cracks, bleeds, and reshapes itself around the growing weight. The pain is immense. Eating becomes difficult, speaking becomes strained. But turning back is not an option. The size of the lip plate holds deep meaning. It is not just tradition, it is a transaction. The wider the plate, the more cattle a family can request as bride price. A 6-inch disc may secure up to 50 cows. Smaller plates command less. No plate at all. Often, it means no marriage, no honor. To the Mursi, this act is not mutilation. It is transformation. The plate becomes a visible symbol of pride, endurance, and social worth. Mothers who once bore the pain now encourage their daughters to do the same. They whisper stories of ancestors who wore their scars like crowns, who earned respect not by soft beauty, but by brutal resilience. Many women choose to decorate their plates, etching patterns into the clay, adding color or smoothness to the surface. Each design becomes part of their identity, part of the silent language passed among Mursi women. Yet beneath the artistry lies a permanent mark, the stretched, raw flesh that speaks of suffering turned into strength. To outsiders, the plates may look strange, even grotesque. But within the tribe, they are powerful emblems. They shape a girl's future, determine her status, and tell the world she has paid the price of becoming Mursi still. While the lip plates draw the eye, it's death itself that draws the tribe together. When a death stirs unrest in the Mursi tribe, the living do not seek answers from witnesses. They look to the dead. In this ancient culture, death is not an end, it is a signal, a warning that something has been broken, and to restore balance, the spirits must speak. Suspicious deaths, those without clear cause, or those that occur too soon, are never considered. Accidents, they are messages, a curse, a sign that a boundary has been crossed, often by someone still among the living in such times. The tribe gathers for a ritual older than memory, the spirit dance dot at dusk. Fires are lit, ashes smeared. Across foreheads, women wail into the wind while elders chant the names of ancestors. A chosen medium enters a trance, shaking violently as drums pound into the night. In this altered state, it is believed the dead possess the body and reveal truths hidden from mortal eyes. Blame is not assigned through logic. It is read in the flicker of firelight, in the medium's cries, in signs seen only by the elders. Sometimes it's a neighbor, sometimes a relative. The accused may not even have been present at the death, but in the spirit world. Guilt takes many forms. Punishment follows swiftly. The cursed are given to choices: exile from the community, or bloodletting to cleanse the spiritual rot. Those who stay must cut themselves and let the blood drip onto the earth. It is not seen as violence, but as healing, as payment to the unseen forces disturbed by the death. No one dares challenge the decision. To question it is to invite the curse upon oneself. In Mursi law, guilt lives in the unseen and justice bleeds through the skin. But among the Mursi, not all conflict ends with exile. In the heart of the Mursi tribe, there is no courtroom, no judge, no need for long arguments or written laws. Disputes, whether over land, pride, or the right to a woman's hand, are settled in a circle of dirt, under a blazing sun, with sticks as the only law. This is the donga, a brutal stick-fighting ritual where men strip down to the waist, grab their long wooden staffs, and step into combat with no protection and no pity. Each donga is a duel, but it is far more than sport. It is justice. It is ritual. It is war carried out under the watchful eyes of the tribe. Fighters swing with terrifying speed, aiming not to kill, but to break. Bones snap, faces swell, blood spatters the ground. There are no referees, no limits to how hard a man can strike. Sometimes a match ends in seconds. Sometimes it drags on with both men barely able to stand. But only one leaves as victor, and with him goes the prize, honor, resolution, and in many cases, the right to marry. Among the Mursi, a man who wins at donga has proven his worth. He has shown he can endure agony, face danger, and fight for what he believes is his. Women watch from the edges, knowing their future may be tied to the outcome. Elders look on, judging more than just the strikes. They watch for a spirit, control, and unshakable resolve. To lose is not simply defeat, it is humiliation. The loser limps away with shattered pride and bruised skin, often nursing wounds for weeks. But to refuse a donga when challenged, that is unthinkable. A man who won't fight loses his standing. He becomes invisible. The donga is not a game. It is a declaration. That pain can bring justice. That scars can settle truth. But there is one fear even stronger than the donga stick or the sting of exile to the outside world. The Mursi appear frozen in time, draped in animal skins, adorned with lip plates scarred by ritual. But beneath the surface of tradition lies a growing fear, not of drought, not of war, but of modernity itself. Among the Mursi, the arrival of outsiders with cameras is not met with wonder, it is met with suspicion and often fury. Many elders believe that a photograph does not merely capture an image, it traps the spirit. That the moment the shutter clicks, something sacred is taken, a part of the soul, stolen forever. Others fear something even darker, that cameras awaken the dead, that flashbulbs disturb ancestors long buried, drawing their anger toward the living. Some whisper of unexplained illnesses after photos were taken, children falling sick, crops dying without cause. In a world governed by spirits and signs, technology becomes a dangerous ghost dog tourism. Once rare, now arrives in vans and buses. Foreigners eager to snap images of painted faces and tribal dances often cross lines they do not understand. They push cameras into faces without permission. Offer coins for photos like buying tokens from a human exhibit. To the Mursi, this is not curiosity, it is violation. Offenses are not always forgiven. Some tribes' people respond with threats, others with ritual curses meant to drive intruders away, in rare cases. Elders demand cleansing ceremonies, smearing ashes, chanting to the spirits, and sacrificing animals to erase the damage brought by outsiders. In extreme cases, the offender is banished from returning a form of spiritual exile, enforced with silence or spears. The Mursi do not resist modernity because they do not understand it. They resist because they do understand it. They see it as erosion of belief, of identity, of power passed down through scars and suffering. The tribe is not just fighting for survival. It is fighting for purity, for a way of life that refuses to be translated into pixels or posted for likes. Because, in the Mursi world, some things are not meant to be seen by strangers. Some things are sacred and must remain untouched.